We are Irish side of the moon. Freedom of information, personal empowerment. The Irish side of the moon.
I still have a dream.
There are many sources of energy available.
Everything is energy. My God, do we need this or what? Free our mind.
Corporations have taken over the world.
Freedom of information, personal empowerment. The Irish side of the moon.
Hello, you're very welcome once again to theirishsideofthemoon.ie. This is show 119. The guest is David Gardner, and this is Michael Leddy at the microphone. Hello, you're very welcome. Okay, who is Dave Gardner? Go to growthbusters.org, and that will set the scene for who this gentleman is. Growthbusters, Growthbusters, growthbusters.org, and you'll find out that Dave Gardner has worked as a professional director for over 30 years. During his career, he's directed documentaries and other award-winning projects for a long list of corporate clients. He eventually found a successful career serving big business, and a life pursuing the American dream were not his holy grail. It says here underneath the picture, which says "Will direct to save the planet," that his concern about society's growth addiction began when he noticed rapidly growing population centres in the American West, and they are in denial about the limits of water available to feed their continued growth frenzy. Growthbusters.org, also on Facebook, facebook.com/growthbusters. On the info page it says here, a documentary examining our worship of growth, urban growth, population growth, consumption growth and economic growth. And it directs you back to the website where you can see the trailer. So yes, this gentleman has directed a movie, and that's what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the message, the very important message of the movie, and also to talk about how he came to be delivering this message. That's always the first part of these interviews. This is the first thing I like to find out when I talk to people, how they came to be doing what they're doing. Then we find out what their message is, and then in my favorite part of the talks, we find out how they do what they do. This is the thing that is unique to my interviews, certainly in my experience, and I really enjoy it, and I really find that the guests enjoy it also, because it's something they don't get asked very well ever, really, as far as I can see, listening to other shows. And also it's very much to the core of the personal empowerment idea of the Irish side of the moon, very much to the core of why we are doing this project. The idea that you can hear these people, hear their messages, and hear messages that don't often get respect in the mainstream. That's one element. But then we come to that element I talked about, the idea that it's to level the playing field a little bit. The idea being that you can see that the steps that you need to take to do what they're doing, to get your message, your concerns, your beliefs out there, are not that difficult, and it really is doable. From the experience of working on this project and seeing how it came together with a conversation one night around my kitchen table, it's very evident to the three of us that it's possible for anyone to do anything. And that sounds a bit Pollyanna. I'm not apologizing for that, because I do mean it and I believe it. And that's why we ask those questions. So yeah, that's the structure of all our talks, and Dave Gardner is a perfect person to ask that, to ask about that, because of his journey and because of what he's changed in his life to follow his beliefs and to follow his passion to deliver the message. Growthbusters.org is the website, and you can read various things there. One of the most important things is the idea to get involved, and there's obviously ways you can do that. You can donate, and that's highly suggested, highly recommended. It's also possible to buy the DVD and then show it in your locality, which is an idea that has the seed of that idea has planted in my mind, I have to be honest. And since speaking to Dave, I've talked about that with a couple of other people here in my area a couple of times. I would very much like to do that. I think it's well worth time and effort spent on it. Not that there's an extraordinary amount of time or effort to be spent on it. It's finding is the difficult thing. Making time for it is the correct way of saying it. But that's definitely something that's on my agenda. Text messaging there with Shane, the other half, the other third, does that sound, of Irish Side. We're about to meet up, but that's irrelevant to the concerns of you, the listener, today. IrishSideOfTheMoon.ie is the website, and if you are listening from another location, I will direct you, as I always do, direct you, dear listener, to the website. Scrolling across in front of me here as I speak to you, I can see Keith Farnish guest, his topic, the category, and a link beside that. Scrolling over, Patricia Walker coming across again, information about her show and a link to listen. Jennifer Harbury, I see her scrolling across, and likewise the link necessary. And Dr. Marcia Esparza, and again the list continues. Alternatively, you can go into the categories and see what floats your boat, what lights your fire, whatever the story may be. We try to cover a lot, and I think we succeed. You're very welcome to the Irish Side of the Moon. Sit back, enjoy. Unless you're out walking, maybe this is on your iPod and you're walking, so walk heartily in the open spaces, and I hope you enjoy the show. And I'm on the line right now with Dave Gardner of Growthbusters.org. Dave, how are you today?
I'm great, Michael. It's nice to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. It's a pleasure to talk about your work. And I watched your movie last night and I enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to talking about it, talking about the message, the important message in it. But we have some time. We have some time to chat. So before we get down to the message, let's find out who Dave Gardner is. Documentaries and filmmaking is a big part of your life and has been a big part of your life. Take me right back in time to the first time that you started to think that that would be something you would like to do. What is it about making documentaries then? What is it about doing this kind of work, filmmaking? What is it that got it into your blood, Dave?
Well, without belaboring that too much, I found when I was in high school that was where my creative talent really was. I started taking filmmaking classes really in order to dodge studying classic literature, which now I regret. I wish I had had studied all of, I wish I'd read all the classics and done that as well. But I did start dabbling in filmmaking as a high school student, although I didn't really consider it as a career till I was in college and running out of radio classes to take.
And it's something that worked out for you because you managed to get a lot of work. You've obviously worked for years. And how did that come about in terms of putting yourself out there and getting work at something you enjoy doing?
Well, I was a high achiever, a little bit of a rebel, but also pretty much a high achiever. So when I decided to make a career of filmmaking, I really ignored a lot of other things and didn't have a very balanced life in order to be a successful filmmaker. As a result, I did rise to the top of my craft. I did a couple of seasons of a public television series in the U.S. back in the early 1980s, but that was low pay and long hours, even though it was great work. So I ended up...
sometimes these things can be enjoyable. I mean, the financial reward mightn't be huge, but if you're doing what you love.
Yeah, in fact, I wish, it turns out I probably should have stayed there and kept doing that kind of work, but instead I chased the almighty dollar and wanted to play more, and so I ended up working in the corporate field, doing films for Fortune 500 companies, helping them grow their market, increase their profits, sell more products, etc. And I had a great career doing that. But I think there was always a journalist in me, and so even those corporate clients, I was frequently convincing them to let me do a documentary-style project because I felt like there was a lot more credibility when you let real people honestly tell their story instead of writing words on a script to have them speak.
You mentioned dodging literature, but for yourself, and you mentioned journalism there. Were you a writer? Were you ever interested in journalism from the purely written word aspect of it, or is that part of your makeup?
Oh, there's definitely a part of that. I consider myself a pretty fine writer. My father actually taught me originally to be a good business writer, and just as a creative person making films, I hired the best writers I could in my early days, and learned a lot from the best in the business, and eventually began writing my own scripts. And I do a lot of writing just on my blog for Growthbusters.org.
Yeah, I was looking at the blog, all right. I was seeing some of the entries, and I was reading a few things that I even just posted some quotes and things onto the Irish Side Facebook a few hours ago, just some of the things. So yeah, the writer is definitely in you as well, and that's filmmaking, the storytelling, as much as anything else, isn't it?
That is. That's true. So it's pretty challenging to be good at one without being pretty good at the other. Although depending on where you land on the craft side of things, you could be a good cinematographer and not necessarily be a good writer. But if you're a real film author, a director who has a strong hand in every element of the film, it really helps to be a good writer.
We'll be talking about Hooked on Growth. We'll be talking at length about Growthbusters.org. But before we talk about that movie and everything, looking back at your other work and going back even into the corporate work, are there things you look back on that you're very pleased with in terms of creatively or whatever it was about them, something you look back on that you're very pleased with, very proud of? I'm not prepared to answer that question very well. I'm going to give you an honest answer, which I may regret. Yeah.
Because, I was thinking one of my most challenging projects on the corporate side is not one that I'm particularly proud of. I think I did a terrific job of it, but the reason I did so well in that and a number of the projects I did was because I became a master of spin. And I despise spin, especially now. I fight against spin. I crusade against spin. And so I was working for the dark side and using my talents not necessarily for the good of humankind when I did that, but I was really good at it. So I'm going to actually not even name the client or the project, and instead jump to there was a project that really might surprise people that I did in 1991, a documentary for a utility company that was way ahead of its time. This was a for-profit utility in the United States of America. Hard to believe, but they were actually going to build a wind farm, and they called it a solar park. They were going to build two power plants, one to harvest the power of the wind, one to harvest the power of the sun. They were doing this in 1991. They knew it was going to be costly to them. It wasn't going to be profitable. But they said, we see this in our future, and we want to get our hands wet, our hands dirty, some experience under our belt, and try it out. And so they hired me to document that project, and that was probably one of the most just enjoyable, fulfilling projects I've done in my entire life.
Cool. When you mentioned the other work, the corporate work, and the idea of going to the dark side, there's a lot of logic as well in that being in your skill set. It makes sense to me logically, because the old saying, it takes a thief to catch a thief, or the old Robert Wagner TV show, the idea that somebody who understands spin, and as you say, despises it, but understands it because you were a proponent of it, can now use that to your advantage. A, to put a spin on a positive message, and B, to recognize spin in other aspects and point it out to the rest of us, that kind of thing. So logically, it's not that. It's not. It makes sense, yeah, that you might have that in your skill set. So it's not a bad thing at all. It's a fantastic thing, isn't it? Must be a great act.
You bring up two positives. I would agree with both A and B, but I would add a C, which is the one downside I find when you're making documentary films, and especially if you're making a film that you are in, and I reluctantly am in Growthbusters, and also when you're communicating with people, about a movement, which is what I'm involved in, is a movement towards sustainability. I find that the spin skill set gets in my way sometimes. It keeps me from being authentic. I have to really work hard not to write in corporate speak.
Okay, I actually understand what you mean. Yeah, it's easier to go for the soundbite maybe, and that's counterproductive for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think people, even though they don't necessarily recognize spin, I think they have an inherent spin radar and are a little less likely to trust you when you write in that style. So I do have to work hard not to stay in that style.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, we're putting together a picture of who you were and how you came to be doing that work, and we're moving through time. We're moving into the 90s. And gradually, as we're coming forward in time, obviously, there are changes happening, and your ideas are changing to bring you to a place where you are now, and obviously we'll be talking about Growthbusters in great depth. But what happened at some stage in the recent or semi-recent past to start you thinking differently and start you thinking about maybe abandoning the corporate world, and as you have up on your on the website there, the quote, "will direct to save the planet." There was obviously some consciousness change or something happened with you. Tell us about it.
I'm glad to tell you about that, and I think a lot of listeners may even recognize this in themselves. I don't think it's certainly not unique to me, and I hope everybody goes through this kind of development process. When I was in my 20s, I was interested in being a success. When I was in my 30s, I was interested in being a success, but also being a good provider, a good husband, and a good father. And I fell into the really common trap of measuring my success at those, just based on comparing myself to keeping up with the Joneses, comparing myself with other people, seeking status. What kind of cars were we driving? How nice was our house? I was driven by that. That was my measure of success. And I took a midlife crisis, I guess, when I hit 40 to realize, wow, I have given up a lot of time with my kids in order to be a good provider, and that turns out that wasn't really what they wanted. They really wanted time with their dad. They didn't need all the fancy things, and even my wife. My marriage failed because my wife couldn't have access to me, and she couldn't get me to understand that she was willing to give up the quote-unquote good life in order to just have me be actually emotionally and mentally present in the family and the marriage. So I lost my family in a lot of ways, and I think that was the beginning of the metamorphosis for me out of being, chasing the wrong dream and into chasing what really counts for a satisfying life.
Yeah, and as you say, people will relate to it. I relate to it, not personally because I've never had a family, but I know from friends, and I have friendships with people who could tell basically a similar story about losing track, and in a couple of cases, losing a family in the sense that the marriage might break up, etc. So yes, it's not an unusual story in this modern world at all.
I agree. And I had, interestingly, related to the Growthbusters movie, I had hoped to, since I decided I had to be in the film anyway, and we can talk later about why I made that decision. I had hoped. Sorry?
You said you were reluctant to be, so yeah, I do want to talk about that later on.
Yeah, I like to be behind the camera where I'm really at my best. But once I decided to be in the film, I had hoped that I could include more of my personal story because I thought people would relate to that, and it, you know, it's just so much in synchronicity with the major themes of the film regarding public policy and economics and consumption and all that. But you know, I couldn't make a mini-series the length of Lonesome Dove, so that story did not make it into the film, unfortunately, but it's making it into this conversation, so I'm glad to talk about it.
And of course, I mean, there are projects in your future we both expect and hope. So you know, you don't know when you will, you know, you will dive into that aspect, and that can become a project down the road. Of course, that's very realistic. In terms of your changing, you changed direction. So what immediately happened? I mean, like you obviously started looking at doing different documentaries or whatever. What year are we talking about here, where you decided to just make a change and just say, right, I'm going to film something else now. I'm going to film something that means something. Like, whereabouts are we in the timeline?
Okay, that moves us up to 2001. I was so successful in the late 90s that I got to the point where my biggest decision was who to say no to. That was great. The phone would ring, work would come in the door, and I actually was I was actually taking summers off so that I could spend more time with my kids. I was starting to get it and enjoy life a little more. And then we had September 11th, 2001, the World Trade Center disaster, and the economy just sank. And for the first time in a long time following that, my phone wasn't ringing. And I did need some work in order to keep making a living. And so it was time for me to start picking up the phone and actually marketing my services, which I hadn't had to do in about a decade. And I thought to myself, geez, first of all, that's really not high on my list. I don't really like to be the salesperson. And secondly, I thought, well, if I do have to do that, wow, if I'm going to spend so much time trying to find work, why don't I try to find meaningful work? Because I had I had spent 20 years telling other people's stories and you know, enjoying the challenge and doing a great job of it. But there were certainly a lot of issues that I was starting to become concerned about that were bigger, that were beyond the corporate bottom line. So I thought, if I'm going to have to somehow find the money to put groceries on the table, why don't I find the money to put groceries on the table while I'm saving the planet, I guess. Yeah. I know it's a kind of a cliche saying, and you chuckle, but yes, of course. Why not? And you did. You set about. Was it easy? It was the hardest thing I've done in my life, and I have to be honest with you that I haven't figured it out. I am doing the most important work in my life, the most satisfying work of my life, but it's not putting groceries on the table. So that's the missing ingredient, is figuring out how to, you know, just provide a modest income doing it. I basically have to become a starving artist to make Growthbusters, but I have no regrets. And of course, my theory would be, I'm sure like your own, and it does come up in the movie, but we live in a corporate world, and we value the things that you know, bring you money. It's like the group of us doing the Irish side of the moon. Socially meeting people, meeting friends, it becomes a regular question. Oh yeah, do you make much money off that? People will have more value on it if I can tell them, oh God, yeah, we $7 million a year is our annual turnover on our show, you know, because then it means something. And if it doesn't have income, like it's not worth anything. So that's the world, the corporate sensibility, I think, has infected us. Would you agree or disagree? Or I agree, and that's a sad commentary. So, you know, if you find yourself among a more enlightened group who have traveled further down the path that I'm on, and that I'm trying to help illuminate with Growthbusters, then you'll find that you know, that people really respond when you tell them that you're not making a lot of money doing what you're doing. So they will really appreciate that. Of course, yeah. I mean, you respect someone as well, sometimes someone who put their work out there without having the expectation of making money off it, if they're, you know, if they're capable of that, because you can immediately, you judge them immediately, and you think, well, that's a positive judgment because they obviously invested in this message, and they want to get it out there, and you always respond well to that.
not just even something critically important, but some of the musicians as well, people I have met socially who are not as concerned about making a million off it as they are about making people or getting people to hear and hopefully enjoy their music.
Well, what I would wish for everyone is that they have a profession or occupation that they enjoy so much that is something they would do even if they couldn't get paid for it. And that's really what I'm doing. I would tell people I have the world's best job. I do need to try to figure out a way to get paid a little bit for continuing to do it the way I'm doing it, but I'm confident I'll figure that out. And oh my gosh, I'm having the time of my life.
And that is a perfect place for us to take a short break. I think we've built up first part of an interview. For me, it's always important to find out who the heck are you? Who the heck are you? So we get a picture of who you are, who you were, and how you have changed and grown to kind of make the choices that you have made. And we kind of have got, I think we've got a good snippet, tiny snippet, but we have a good indication of what brought you to where you are today. We're going to take a very short break, and we're going to return. And when we return, we're going to be focusing on Growthbusters.org, and we'll be talking about your new movie and the message contained within it. With Dave Gardner of Growthbusters.org. Dave, what is your message? What is it you're telling us with when we go to Growthbusters.org and when we watch your movie? What's the message? What are you trying to get people to realize?
Bottom line, the film Growthbusters is intended to bring attention to the fact that we, humanity, have outgrown the planet, and it is time to embrace the end of growth.
And in the movie, you draw on some fairly frightening statistics to back up your thinking and why you believe what you believe.
A few, although some people accuse me of not providing enough of the facts, and that's always a challenge for a documentary filmmaker. Is You're trying to keep people engaged and inspire people and keep them awake. So you have to have a balance between facts and drama in there. And so a lot of the facts.
It opens with a humorous idea. There's a humorous image that goes through it. Goes obviously through the website as well, but it runs through the movie. It opens with it. It ends with it. And wisely, it doesn't intrude in the middle of it at all. Like it's like a standard enough documentary in that sense. But there are elements of humor, and that's a fantastic tool to have, a great asset in your arsenal when you need to get across an important message.
Well, absolutely, because the film is it's kind of a splash of cold water to the face. It's a wake-up call. Some people would say it's bad news. The bad news is the party's over, that we can't go on living high on the hog like we have. The film, I hate to ever leave it at that, because the film kind of brings you around, hopefully, to realize that it's really not bad news, because the good news is that chasing growth hasn't been delivering the goods anyway. It hasn't been making our lives better for at least the last 30 years or so. And so if we can get unhooked from this addiction to growth, it actually frees us to re-engage with the things that really make for a satisfying life.
In the movie, you refer to a study, you refer to some findings done back in the 1970s, I think 70, 71, that should have been a wake-up call, and yet, as you tell the story of those men, and it's you, one of them, their views warning us about the problems we'd have in this century were attacked from every angle, and nothing really has changed as a consequence of those years. Can you talk a little bit about that? And that was kind of the earliest reference you have in the film to these ideas.
Yeah, I'm glad to talk about that because, you know what, I was stunned to discover I was a little too young to really, for that to be on my radar screen when the Limits to Growth study was released in 1972. It was a group of MIT scientists who had done some computer modeling to just to sort of give us a few scenarios for what the next 100 years might be like if we continued current trends at the time, and then they ran a scenario that said, well, what happens if we slow down population growth? What happens if we slow down economic growth? What happens if we speed them up? Just to kind of paint some pictures for where we might go. And as you indicated, when they released the results, it was pretty startling that the business as usual scenario showed that we would get to the end of growth sometime between 2000 and 2050. We would hit the wall and we would overshoot a little bit, and then we would crash. They didn't really paint a real accurate picture necessarily of what that crash might look like, but they said, you know, if we don't change the trajectories now, it's probably going to be pretty unpleasant when we do hit the wall. And you know what, people back then, you're right, people back then, especially economists and corporate types, poo-pooed the study. But what's really remarkable is here we are, this year is the 40th anniversary of the release of that study, and just last week, a columnist for the Washington Post, George Will, wrote an opinion piece about the limits to growth. I think the title was something about why catastrophe didn't materialize, or why doom didn't materialize. He was repeating a lot of what Bjorn Lomborg wrote just a couple of months ago in a piece called Environmental Alarmism that was published in Foreign Affairs, and they're basically ginning up this same denial of the facts about the limits to growth. They're trying to, for some reason, they're intent on convincing people that the limits to growth scenarios were way off the mark, and that perpetual growth is absolutely possible because we can innovate our way around any resource shortage or any environmental hurdle, just like we have for the last 200 years. And they're repeating the same garbage, and the evidence is overwhelming that things are changing, that we're not going to repeat what we did during the last 40 years.
Yeah, there is. I mean, that you do present, and that's one of the great things about it. It's a very enjoyable movie, but you do present a lot of facts, and you have an extraordinarily large number of people. How long is it? Is it 4 years this is in work, or did I hear you say that somewhere? That how long have you been working on this? Because it looks like a huge body of work just based on the number of people you've obviously had to contact and interview and so forth.
I may have told someone 4 years when I was in denial myself about how long I worked on it. It really was a 6-year project.
Wow.
Partly, a couple of reasons for that. One was I was trying to raise money to fund the project while I was making the film.
Yes.
So I was wearing a couple of hats, and that's not recommended, and now I understand why, because it definitely slows you down. But another reason was that for me, interviewing experts is a part of the research. So I interviewed more people than you see in the film. In fact, I did over 100 interviews, and you only see, I don't know, about 30 people in the film. So I've got a lot of material that didn't make it into the film, but it informed me and helped me make a better film. And I'm actually about to start working on putting together a television series that's just a series of interviews with these smart people that I haven't been able to share with the world yet.
Brilliant, brilliant, yeah. Because even what made it in, and the very, the logistics of it being one movie means you only get a snippet of what everybody is saying. But even that snippet is enough to indicate that these are knowledgeable people, and they're saying a lot of things that make sense, and more important, they're backing them up in a lot of cases with facts and what appears to be very good estimations of what we can expect to happen throughout the rest of this century.
These are really smart people. Most of them have been working on this issue for a long time. In fact, I was shocked to find out how long. I knew I was on the right track with the subject of the film when I had no problem getting them signed up for interviews. I was virtually a nobody in the documentary world. I wasn't Michael Moore. I wasn't Al Gore, and yet they instantly said, "Wow, great idea, great film. I'm on. Come and see me."
Cool. A few things surprised me about it. I was surprised, obviously, that there was a touch of humor there. That was very good, very welcome. Also, I was surprised and delighted to see references in the middle to the world of finance, and a great parallel, the observation that this idea of exponential growth, because this is something we've covered a couple of times on the Irish Side of the Moon. Guests have come on and talked about the lunacy of the debt-based system we live in, and the idea that it's going to be an exponential curve, which is absolute lunacy when you're talking about finite resources. The financial thing, as I say, was a nice surprise. It didn't obviously occupy very much time, but again, you've obviously done a lot of research in that aspect as well, and could probably do a movie on that specifically.
Exactly. In fact, I was disappointed I had to touch on it so briefly, and I've been encouraged to make that the subject of a sequel. I wish I could clone myself. I'd do 5 sequels this year.
Yeah. Oh, I'm delighted to hear that, actually, because, there's definitely, again, so much that needs to be said, and it's always important. So many people have done it, but it's always important to get new voices like yours getting that message out, because it makes a lot of sense. And the fact that you have the two ideas running side by side, the idea of growth and the idea of financial growth, and how ludicrous it is to assume you can do these things exponentially. It's good to hear it. Growth, as you put, one of the things that makes it through the whole movie is this idea of growth as a belief, and it's really the propaganda of growth, and you focus on it very well throughout the movie and how much it's part of the culture, because there's so many news clips and so many people repeatedly saying how growth is good, growth is good, growth is good. How do we, it's up to us, it's not up to you, but how do we change that cultural view?
Well, I believe that, number one, I'm glad you asked about this, because it is the number one obstacle in our path to becoming a sustainable civilization, is we've got to root that myth out of our culture, this myth that prosperity comes from growth and that growth is essential in order to have good lives. But that is strong. It is a religion. You could add up all of the Muslims, Jews, Christians, who am I forgetting? Hindus. You could add all the people worshiping in all of the great religions of the world. Add them all up, and they would be outnumbered by the people who are worshiping growth everlasting. That is the most powerful, pervasive religion in the world. So it's a tall order to overcome that. And I think that the first thing we do is we just have to be aware of it. I think if we're aware that myth is out there, that begins to take the power away from the myth.
Yes.
I try to expose that in the film, and then I also try to expose the propagandists, the growth profiteers who benefit from keeping us believing that myth. They generate even more programming that keeps reinforcing that myth. But there again, once you recognize it, your life will never be the same after you've seen Growthbusters, because at the very least, when you are served I call it being served the Kool-Aid, the pro-growth Kool-Aid. When someone serves you a glass of pro-growth Kool-Aid, and that could be in a newscast, it could be in a television advertisement, it could be in a newspaper article, but it's something that reinforces the myth, you'll recognize it. You'll say, oh, that's the myth. I can see the bias and it won't have as much power over your life anymore.
Agreed. Education is the enemy of any myth. It's the enemy of any propaganda. If you can educate people, and
but it is just a start. I have to admit that that's just the first step.
But it is it's so pervasive. I mean, the town I live in now, I moved to this town 12, 13 years ago. At the time, it was one of the things that everybody was talking about, because some newspaper or I don't even know the origin of it, but it was well known that this was considered to be the fastest growing town in Europe. It had actually, because it was just booming, and Ireland had a boom decade there, which nobody really I had some friends who did very, very sensibly question, and we had some great conversations about it. People much smarter than me that were educating me, but by and large, growth was perceived as being utterly fantastic, and that was the beginning end of all those conversations. It was like, my God, more buildings going up, more housing estates, more student accommodation, there's a new hotel, and nobody, and as I say, until I watched the movie, I never thought much about growth itself, and the fact that it is kind of a fallacy that we all kind of just buy into.
Yeah, and do we have time for me to give you an example from the media just from yesterday about that?
Absolutely. Talk away, yeah.
Okay, because you expect, well, here in the United States we have National Public Radio, which is publicly supported, and that's where we expect to get maybe the most balanced news reporting we can get. It isn't as balanced as we would like, but it isn't influenced by growth profiteers like Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch, if you read his newspapers, I mean, that's very pro-growth. In fact, they have editorials trying to convince you that population growth is wonderful. It's good for us. From National Public Radio, you would hope to get a little bit more balance. And when someone's reporting on climate change, frequently they'll give you both sides of the story. They'll interview somebody, a scientist, who says human-induced climate change is happening, and here's some evidence, and then they'll throw in a soundbite from another one of the rare scientists or pundits who disagrees with the whole theory about climate change.
Yes.
Well, on economic growth, you don't get that. National Public Radio did a story yesterday about new housing starts in the United States, that they were up, highest in 2 years, I believe. And the reporter actually said economists think that a higher number of housing starts would be healthier, and it was unquestioned. She didn't say some economists think that a higher number of housing starts would be healthier. She didn't say for an alternative view, we talked to this other economist, because there are a growing number of economists who believe that we don't need to be growing. In fact, we need to have a contracting economy or a stable economy. But there's not even an inkling in that journalist's head that they need to go for to balance that, because they have grown up drinking that pro-growth Kool-Aid.
Like, it's frightening because it's an all-encompassing truth. It's like it's gravity. It's like it's just accepted growth.
Exactly. Yes.
And yeah, it is a message that you're like, as I say, I'm asking you, what is your message? That's the core of the interview for every guest, really. And your message is, it's a unique spin on what's happening in the world today, because the idea, and it's, although the movie is frightening and bleak in places, in the end, you dabble very briefly because of the time constraints, but you do look at possible solutions, and there are ways that like population growth specifically, there are ways that things could be changed. Can you talk a little bit about that, and the way you kind of end it, and the fact that there are options, not easy ones, not easy choices, but at the same time, it's not a hopeless scenario. We can start doing things.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have made the film, I guess, if I wasn't optimistic. Although we're up against overwhelming odds, I will admit. But I definitely would have liked to have given more screen time to some of the people, the people in movements who are exploring new ways of organizing our lives and our economies, and that could be the next sequel to Growthbusters.
Yes.
Is just to focus on that. But people are working on that, and I didn't include in the film some perfect community somewhere that has it all figured out and is operating completely sustainably, where they're not using up more resources than they're entitled to, or stealing resources from the next generation. because there isn't a perfect community out there yet. So all I could do was highlight a few models that are exploring different aspects of this. And the reason we don't have the perfect model is because we don't have a critical mass of people who get it yet. It is a growing body of people who understand that growth is not the Holy Grail after all. But the more people we can turn on to this idea, the more people, the more creative energy we'll have flowing into doing things like transition towns, steady state economy, the degrowth movement, working less, slow money. There are so many good ideas out there, and you put them all together, and we might actually have something.
We might have a chance. As you were putting it together, as you were doing the research, as you were filming, as you were interviewing people, if you had to say to us that one fact, one piece of data, one image that really, really stood out for you, is there anything leaps to mind where you think, when you read that, or when somebody said it to you on camera or off camera, it really encapsulated the message perfectly and kind of stood out for you? Or is it just for you a mass of data from all directions at this stage? Which would be?
It might be. It's a comment. I believe it made it into the film. You can correct me if you don't recall seeing it. But it was Dennis Meadows who was the leader of the MIT group that did the Limits to Growth study. And Dennis in the interview said to me, "I don't have to be against growth. The planet's against it." And that was a kind of a turning point for me when I did that interview. I realized, wow, I thought that I was, with the Growthbusters movie, that I was trying to stop growth, to enlist people around the world to help me to stop growth. And it turns out what I really needed to be doing was enlisting people to embrace the end of growth. It turns out, growth is ending. We're seeing it. I mean, here we are, 4 years, 4 years after the Great Recession began. We haven't been able to restore robust economic growth. Why? It's because the planet is against it. We finally maxed out, the scale of humanity, and it's the benefits of growth. Growth is no longer profitable. As Herman Daly, grandfather of ecological economics, says, growth has become uneconomic. It costs us more to grow than it does for us to stabilize. And so that was a big turning point. And I think that's big. That we don't have to stop growth. We need to embrace the end of growth because we're experiencing it right now.
Okay, it's not even a conscious decision. You mentioned profitable there. You mentioned profit, and that's a cornerstone of the world today. That, as I said earlier, the corporate world. We're all consumers, and this comes up in the movie as well. We're all consumers. We are class. We're no longer people, and it's so important that we buy stuff. And you use a George Carlin clip to illustrate this idea of us amassing stuff and then moving stuff and then storing stuff, and that's part of the world today. Is that people? It's not that people really want all this stuff, but we are brought up and taught to want it. We're taught to believe we must have the newest phone, the biggest TV, the next shiniest thing, and that's something that needs to be. People need to be made aware of that and where that's coming from, and where is it coming from.
Yeah, that's huge, and that's all based on this. We've created a system that requires that there be more money in floating around in the economy next year than this year, and that means we're stuck. We're stuck if we keep this system alive. The only way to do that is to every year to extract more resources from the planet and convert them into products and buy the products and use the products and throw them away in an ever-increasing quantity year after year, and have more and more people year after year doing that. They're both Ponzi schemes, which we all know can't continue forever.
Yeah, it's just not possible. It just is not possible. Okay, as we build towards another break, we've got 3 or 4 minutes before the next break. That's setting the picture. So we started off, we were talking about who you are and how you've got to do what you're doing. Now we've talked about your message, and we're getting, from talking to you and from listening to you explain it, we can all see what the movie's about. And again, people who haven't seen it or won't be able to see it yet, they can go to growbusters.org And on there, you've got a blog, and you quote on other people. You mention stories and things. That's a good place to send people right now, isn't it? To kind of see what you're doing, and they can also donate. They can also kind of help you with your message. So that's an important web address to get out there right now.
Yes, and people can also, they can view a trailer for the film there, they can order the film, they can find a schedule of screenings. We try to keep track. We don't always know where the film's being screened because it's being screened by just grassroots supporters around the world who believe in getting the message out. They're welcome to order the film and get a room at their local library or church or community center and invite people to come and see it. So if they let us know they're showing the film, we'll put that on our screening schedule.
Okay, that's actually interesting. Okay, because now obviously I have a copy of the movie, obviously through yourself and through doing the interview. So we could say to you that, hey, we want to organize something, and you just mentioned a library. I know for a fact there's a downstairs room here. I've been there for a few things. So we could actually do that and kind of spread the word and get a few people in, and people could see it.
Yes, that's the way this film is being distributed. That's why it's not putting groceries on my table.
Yeah, you made reference to that, all right, and of course.
But that's okay because the most important thing is for us to get the word out.
Okay, very, very true. Okay, okay. So we direct people to the website so they get that information, and as you say, there are ways that communities are showing them. That now I did not realize. I hadn't realized that at all. We're going to take a very short break, and then we're going to come back. And I'm going to ask you a couple of more questions about how you do what you do. And stay on the line, Dave Gardner. That idea, the idea of grassroots supporters showing the movie is the idea that's really taken form in my mind. I like that idea a lot. Again, by going to the website, by getting your hands on the movie, you can then show it in your community. I've seen the movie, I have the movie through doing this show, this interview, and I'm very much interested in doing that locally. So let's see if that I can make that happen. It's up to me to make it happen. So yeah, that's another reason that people could be excited about this. See the trailer. Get your hands on the movie if you like the message, and from listening to Dave talk to me, and then maybe follow up on that same idea and get in touch with them at Growth, GROWTH, busters.org. Mentioning of the blog, that's on the website as well. Just looking at a post here, just as I record this, the most recent one, talking about Earth Overshoot Day. This day marks the day of the year we've used up the resources of the Earth. We've used up the resources the Earth can replenish in a year's time. From this day until the end of the year, our resource use will overdraw our natural resource account, liquidating forests, soil, minerals, aquifers, and livable atmosphere faster than they are regenerated. When we are behaving sustainably, Earth Overshoot Day will occur on December 31st, or not at all, as we are dipping into the principal in our national capital account. Unfortunately, Earth Overshoot Day occurs earlier each year, not later. And that, of course, is no great surprise. That's just a paragraph I'm taking from the, as I say, the most recent post at the moment, and that's on the blog. So there's updates on that on growthbusters.org. Stay with us after the break. On the line with Dave Gardner of Growthbusters.org. Dave, how are you?
I'm great.
We've been talking about the movie. We've been telling people to go to Growthbusters.org and have a look at the trailer and maybe get involved if they wish to donate, etc. I'm going to step away from the message now. Again, the last part of the interview, I always ask people, how do you do what you do? Now, in your case, it's obvious you've taken on a message that is global in significance. But I'm going to take a guess here, but you didn't obviously set out to save the entire world. You're obviously very concerned, like all of us, with your own patch of the world. And from that, if we all took that kind of responsible attitude, the world would be in a better shape. So in your part of the world, you obviously decided to get involved with the political side of things and impact some change with this message. Tell us a bit about that and the thought processes behind you thinking, you know, I'm going to stand up in front of the people and see, can I be a leader?
Well, I think I'm glad to have the opportunity to address this because it's a cliche, I know, but it's so true that when they say think globally, act locally. It's so hard to imagine making a difference in public policy at the national level or on a global level. It's a lot easier to imagine making a difference in your own community. And actually, the film was only made because of my frustration at being a growthbuster in my own town. I originally just set out to get my own community to adopt a more modern prosperity strategy that didn't depend on perpetual growth. And I was having very limited success, really no success.
That is very limited.
Yeah. And what I discovered was that, I was trying to solve a problem that most people didn't think was a problem. They thought, growth is good. So they were tended to ignore all of the costs of growth, all the downsides, and the fact that growth wasn't even delivering what I call the pot of gold at the end of the growth rainbow. We never could find that pot of gold, but we were going to keep on looking for it. So I was trying to shine a big spotlight on the public policies in my own town that subsidized and pursued growth. In this case, it was mostly population growth, but that is driven by this belief that economic growth is necessary. The more people you have in your city, the more taxpayers you have, the more commerce is going on, and so that you have a bigger economy. So I was working on that, and I had limited success because people didn't understand that there was a problem. So I made the film, and of course I continue in my own town to speak whenever I get the opportunity to do interviews. I submit editorials or op-ed pieces to the newspapers, and I get on radio when I can, and constantly hammering home this message that growth is not delivering the prosperity or the good life anymore. And and I can see that I'm making slow progress, but it's very slow.
When you're talking to people face to face, either one-on-one or in front of a group, which you do, what's that like? I mean, do you find yourself getting resistance, and how do you deal with that to keep getting your message across? Or do you find maybe bit by bit more and more people becoming accepting of these ideas?
Well, I do find I run into a lot of resistance, even from people who sort of get it a little bit, who understand the horrible environmental price that we're paying for economic growth today. They might get that, but in their heart of hearts, they haven't really stepped back and looked at the big picture and thought about whether economic growth could or should actually come to a halt. In fact, I just did a newspaper interview early this morning where the reporter obviously understood all of the concepts we were talking about, but he asked me a question. He said, so are you trying to convince people that maybe 2% annual economic growth would be a good target or something like that? And I just had to say no. No growth is a good target. Economic contraction is actually in the developed world. We actually need to contract our economies. We have to get back into a sustainable balance, and that is such a it is such a radical concept that I run into a lot of resistance, and I'm constantly refining my message and learning from my mistakes and trying to get better at putting the right words together to help people, kind of help that light bulb go on. And I think probably the number one thing I've learned is to explain and remind people or point out to people that, it's not. Growth has not delivered the goods for the last 30 years. It has not improved our lives. It has not made us more prosperous. And so we're not giving up that much if we give up that pursuit of growth. It really frees us to claim the things that we gave up when we became consumers. I hate the fact that we're no longer citizens. We're no longer human beings. We're just consumers.
And the next question is an important one because, it comes up with so many of the guests, and it's just you dealing with that resistance to your message. And on a very human level, I want to ask you, when the day is over and when you go back home and you make yourself a cup of coffee or you take a beer from the fridge, and you must, where do you get the strength to say, right, I'm going to do this again tomorrow, even though that there tonight was just, like that journalist you mentioned just isn't getting it. But yet, the next day you come back and you do it again. So how do you do that on a personal level? Is it your optimism? Is it the fact that you can see an end point? How do you do what you do?
It really takes about 24 beers every morning. That's the secret.
Well, there you go. I think that's the quote that I'm going to use for this interview. I think that's the quote. That's the one to sell. We put that at the top of the show. I love it.
That's right. It'll come back to haunt me somehow.
Yeah.
You know what? All I can say is that it must be because, I get beaten back. I feel sometimes like I'm tilting at windmills.
Yeah.
I feel like I gained 2 inches today, and tomorrow I'm pushed back 3 inches, and and it's not feet, and it's not miles or kilometers. So why haven't I become discouraged? And I see a lot of other people who've been in this crusade much longer than me who are becoming discouraged. So I worry about that. But so far I'm not, and I think it's because it is just so phenomenally important. It is the biggest decision for our civilization. It's the decision of whether we're going to survive as a civilization or not. And it's a decision that's going to affect whether my children have any kind of quality of life or not. It'll actually impact my quality of life, but forget me. What about my kids? I want them to have a planet that's worth inheriting.
Brilliant. And again, it's such an important question because not only does it apply to our guests on the Irish side, but the listeners. There's so many people listening to us talk right now, and they're, flying the flag for this message or another message or several messages. And sometimes just on a personal level, as you talk in your community, your friends don't get it. And you just kind of, do I stop talking about this? Do I stop annoying people? And that's why it's so important to hear someone like you tell us what you have to do, or how you get through it, and how you continue to come back and do it again.
Sometimes I think it must be an unhealthy obsession, and it might be in my case. But I think it's interesting that every time I get together at a party, every time I get together at a family reunion, or just with family and friends, inevitably the conversation turns to my film and the issues around our addiction to growth. People never get tired of talking about it, asking about it. I'm reluctant to bring it up because I don't want to be a bore.
Of course.
But this subject does not bore people, so that's probably a good sign.
Yeah, that is a very good sign. You mentioned people getting discouraged, people who work in this kind of area and have the same message. And that leads me to the next question I have for you, and again, it's all under the how do you do what you do. Working with people, finding people, the crew that work with you on the movie, this citizen-powered media. Can you talk to me a little bit about that in terms of your day-to-day work life, the people who are with you and the people you've met who are doing similar work, carrying this message or a very similar message out?
Well, some of this answer might actually surprise you, and part of it is the fact that I do still have a little bit of that corporate spin doctor mentality in me, so I struggle to be authentic enough to really make it clear in my on Facebook or on our website or in the blogs or the emails that I send out. I probably don't stress how lonely I am in this sometimes. I do not have as much help as everybody thinks I do.
Oh.
Most people are still plugged into the system, and they're out there just trying to survive, so they have limited time to contribute to the cause. So even though we have a nonprofit, and there are people around the world who are cheering us on a day-to-day basis, we go sometimes. We might go a month without getting a single donation.
Of course.
And I don't have the money to have one or two people on staff full time in here helping me, even though there's plenty of work to be done, and it would be tremendous to have that.
Oh yeah, I mean, in some ways it is surprising, and then in other ways it doesn't surprise me at all. And again, of course, due to the nature of the work you're doing, it's not like you have a great financial backing for what you're at. I remember in the very, very start of this project, which is still a small project in its own way, but we really only started off to do 10 podcasts. We didn't have any aspirations 3 years ago for a website or for being on radio stations. But early on, a couple of people got back to us, and they were as if we were more than we were or bigger than we were. And Gabriel, who hosts the show as well with at different times with myself, has said, and it's a wonderful quote, if they perceive us as more than we are, then we need to become more than. I love.
Well, and I'm working on that. I struggle with just being honest about where we are now, and sometimes I think I should, put out there an image of being bigger and more successmore. But I really do think it's important to be authentic. But I also believe that it's we're getting there. We're on the verge. I think as more people discover the film, I get approached out of the blue almost daily from some organization that wants to show the film, another festival that wants to show the film, and so the only the missing ingredient now is just for us to find a way to marshal some financial resources so that we can do a little bit better job of producing the next film and the TV series and getting those films more widely seen than this one.
As a fan of various TV shows, I was a fan of TV shows, everything from 24 to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm a great follower of the entertainment trends. And I see a change happening. I see creators like Joss Whedon going to the internet, and the idea of people raising funds more and becoming something like what you're doing in your website, but it's becoming more and more the norm. Do you follow those kind of trends, and do you think that you're looking at another 5 or 10 years where it will be so much easier for people such as yourself to do that, to raise the interest and raise awareness and raise funding from people like myself who are just interested? Oh, I've seen what this guy does. I want to see his other documentary. He just needs $20 now and he'll get it done. Do you think that that's happening, or do you follow those kind of trends?
Oh, I do follow it, and in fact, we raised our last $20,000 on Kickstarter, crowdfunding.
Kickstarter is, of course.
Right?
Kickstarter is a big one, of course.
Yeah, and I think it cuts both ways, and it's part of the splintering of the audience, and in some ways it makes it harder for you to get your message more widely seen, but easier for you to connect with the people who will really appreciate your message and support what you're doing. So I think it's mostly going to be a good to help us find a way to have the resources to keep this going, but it will make it maybe perhaps more challenging for us to do what I call a sneak attack. I have to find ways to get the message in front of the people who are kind of on the fringe, who might be open, maybe barely open-minded enough to consider the things that we're talking about in Growthbusters, and it's harder to find those. It's easier in a mass media world. It was easier to get something in front of them.
Yes, of course. I mean, it's great and it's satisfying on one level to preach to the choir and have the people watching you and supporting you who already believe you and believe the message. But exactly, if this was airing on ABC on a Sunday night at 9 and you guaranteed 18 or 20 million of a viewership, it would be so much easier to get those people that you target. And that's, the modern world now is so splintered in terms of the choice.
Yep, you get it. That's exactly right.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. Looking again at the movie, looking again at the core messages of this movie, it comes across, you talked about the scale of how many of us there are, the scale of the economy. They are two important through lines for the message, aren't they?
They are. In fact, at first, when I first started working on the film, I thought I was doing a film about, city, urban growth and population growth. It took me a year, perhaps, of research before I discovered that the root of the problem was really our obsession with economic growth. So it ended up being a film about both, about how many of us there are, and about how we're behaving, the size of our economies, how much we're consuming. And Paul Ehrlich, author of The Population Bomb, who did a great interview in the film, does a great job of explaining how those are two multipliers in an equation, and the more people you have, the less consumption you have to have if you want to be living in a sustainable balance where you're not using up the planet. Vice versa, if you really want to consume like crazy, if you want to fly around in your own private jet and drive a Hummer and have 3 vacation homes around the world, then you better be really serious about limiting the number of people doing that, because not very many of us can live on the planet and do that. And we're in such a global emergency that the truth is we have got to scale back. Those of us in the rich world, we have got to scale back on both counts.
I know the part. I think I know the part you're on about. It was the part the graph came up where, by making it twice as long, saying if there's twice as many people, you need to bring down, because ultimately you're dealing with finite resources, and that's why these arguments and the case that is made in your film is so logical, because it's common sense that we need to be, it's common sense that we do live on a finite planet with finite resources. It's just common sense, and yet it can be so hard to get it through to some people.
Yeah, we're just up against the blind faith in the power of economic growth and the belief that we can innovate our way out of resource constraints.
Okay, in the last few minutes, we're not desperate for time yet, but we're building towards the climax. Through our conversation, we've built a pretty good picture, I hope. We got a picture of who you were back in the 80s, 90s, the sort of work that was of interest to you, and you began to use your skills, and you were very successful, as you say, doing that. And then we looked at the message of today, your message of today, and we looked at the movie, we looked at Growthbusters.org, and now we've talked for a little while about how you do what you do and how important it is to start locally. And as I say, you didn't set out to rule to change the world, but certainly to change your own backyard, and got involved in local politics, as we saw in the movie. You're in the movie, and you referred to this fact that you didn't really want to be in the movie. You're in it at the start. There's a lovely humorous sequence a couple of times. There's costumes and everything. But yet, obviously, somebody talked you into putting your face up there. I think it's probably a wise choice for loads of reasons, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you were very resistant to doing that. You'd rather not be on screen at all.
Well, I'm really good at standing behind the camera and counseling, coaching somebody in front of the camera to deliver an authentic performance. And it's really, I know Clint Eastwood does it, I guess does it pretty well, where he's in the movies and he directs himself. But it's a lot more challenging to do that. And also, I never have considered myself a great performer to begin with. But I needed I was sure that I needed a human interest story. I didn't want the film to just be another list of facts, just another educational film. So I needed a Growthbuster. I needed someone who was crusading to get his community into a recovery program from growth addiction. And, well, I was the guy in my own town who was doing that, so I had easy access to him. The challenge was just, filming yourself. And and it turns out that I, over the course of the years doing the film, I also developed a pretty good skill set where I got a lot better at sitting in front of the camera and actually talking to the camera and being a performer. So it's worked out pretty well. I think
I'm which is never a great thing to do on radio, but I am nodding along here because I think you're right. I think it's a wise decision. Simply, the audience always needs an entry point. We need somebody. There has to be. It could be a turn-off if it was just a disembodied voice followed by all these talking heads. I mean, I'm not saying that format doesn't work. It does. I watch documentaries. We all do it. But there is something when somebody does like you're doing, and you just immediately step in front of the camera and you open by talking a little bit about your family, your children, and you close that way. And there's the little spin, the little thing with the Ghostbusters idea. I think it's putting the spin on the message, isn't it? It becomes something that people find more palatable almost.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit of a, I was always a little bit of the class clown, and because of the kind of the dark parts of the subject, I knew we needed humor, so it was easy. That was an easy way for me to get the humor in there, and also, people could accuse me or the film of preaching to them about how they should live their lives, and I thought it was important to illustrate to everyone that I'm a part of the problem. I'm as guilty as anyone of living an unsustainable. I was chasing the quote unquote American dream that isn't the right dream. So I felt it was important for me to stand there and bear all in front of the world and say, I confess, I was a part of the problem. I'm still a part of the problem. I'm on a journey toward making my life more sustainable.
I don't live in America. I have family there. I visited America. I like it very much. But I'm very aware of when in the political situation. You say there now a moment ago about the American dream being the wrong dream. That's not a message that will go down very well, I think, as an outsider looking in modern day America. I think, is it true to say that even just saying that alone, without even beginning to talk about issues of population growth or resources, just saying that the American dream is somehow wrong is going to make you enemies, people who don't want to think about what you have to say, but just want to hit you because of that?
Yes, absolutely. That is it's a conversation stopper, and that kind of raises a big question, which is, well, how do you get the message across? A lot of people, as I was making the film, counseled me to soften it up and sugarcoat the message, and I had to do a lot of soul searching because, we're standing on the curb and we're stepping off the curb in front of a speeding bus.
Yeah.
And and I don't feel like we have time for me to say, look at the lovely sidewalk. Isn't it nice to stay on the sidewalk? I feel like it's my duty to say, there's a speeding bus coming. Don't step off the curb. And it's an unpleasant thing to hear, but I think I owe it to us. And I like to say this is Adult Swim. Grow up, take the medicine. You don't need a spoonful of sugar to take the medicine. But I think there's room in this on this issue for all kinds of messages anyway.
Okay, good. And if you look into history, I mean, you can look at many people who were unpopular in their times messages, unpopular in the times they lived in, were proven to be right. I mean, depending on whether these people were stoned to death or not, you may or may not take comfort from that. But at least
I'm sure when I'm dead and gone, there'll be a statue erected to honor me.
There you go. A question I have to ask before we part company. Somebody listening to us right now, okay? Now, they might have their own message. They might be a film student, and they might be concerned about something like fluoride in the water, or they might be concerned about and they might think, I could do 20 minutes, I could do a documentary here locally, I could do something that could be worthwhile. What would you tell them to do with regard, how would you advise somebody like that with regard towards contacting people, towards filming interviews, towards believing that you can do it? I mean, what's the first step? I mean, I don't need any detailed answers, but the first step in somebody listening to us right now doing what you do.
Well, I think if you have a passion about the subject, that unleashes a lot of power for you to go in a lot of different ways. But I would advise people to try not to work alone. It is so much easier if you have a team, at least a partner, a collaborator in whatever you're doing. It is the technology today makes it so easy, so much easier for you to put together whatever type of communication you need, whether it's just using Facebook or making YouTube videos or there are any number of ways for you to get your message out. But I would, maybe this isn't part of the answer you were asking for, but I would also encourage people to really, divide your time and say, I'm going to work on this local, close to home issue that's important to me, but I'm not going to forget about the fact that we wouldn't be fighting this issue if it wasn't for this global addiction to growth. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of my time trying to help more of the world understand that that behavior is unsustainable.
I think, yeah, no, you said there, you prefaced that by saying it wasn't what I was looking for. There's no wrong answer to those questions. No, you know, so we're here to listen to you. We're all here to learn from what you're doing. So there's no such thing as a wrong answer. And yeah, it's interesting how you say there, having people to work with. It's a recurring theme in these shows and various guests, that having like-minded people with you is crucial. It's so crucial for so many people in your position, people we've spoken to. And the more the better, you know, that you draw strength sometimes from just having one or two people in your corner who are working with you. It's not just in your corner, but someone's working with you. I know Irish Side of the Moon, there's 3 of us as the core group. There have been others. But it's important that we have each other at different times, although I'm always lobbying for us to get a beautiful assistant who wears a short skirt. That's just me. But no, so yes, again, nodding to what you say there. It's very bad on radio to nod, but
it's critical. And I think I see so many groups get paralyzed because they're trying to, to reach, agreement among everybody. And that would be, I guess, another thing is if you can get help, that's great, but don't let it paralyze you. Don't insist that everybody agree. Find some commonalities and then just get busy and get going.
Very wise. Dave Gardner would direct people to growthbusters.org. Website link, etc., will be on our site as well with this interview. And wishing you every success, hoping that the things fall into place for you with this project with regard to the financial aspects of this and all future prospects. It's a great message that you're carrying. Just simply on the very fact it's great to have somebody. I like the fact that I watched something that really made me think differently. That's brilliant. I like when that happens. And I like the fact that, it's fact-driven. You've got facts there. And again, if somebody just has an open mind and just considers the message of this movie, they probably will also be looking at things a little bit differently. Dave Gardner, thank you for speaking to us. Thank you for speaking to me. And we'll get you back at some stage down the road when you're doing something else.
I so appreciate this opportunity. Thank you so much.
And that brings us to the end of Irish Side of the Moon 119. Very proud to bring that message to you. Just time left really to direct you to Facebook.com. Facebook.com/Growthbusters will allow you to keep up with Dave's work. Facebook.com Irish Side of the Moon will allow you to keep up with the show, new shows and all of that. And Facebook.com/Michael Leddy will allow you to follow me as I do research for far distant shows, reading books and stuff. So thank you for paying attention to us at Irish Side of the Moon. Bye-bye.
We are Irish Side of the Moon. Freedom of information, personal empowerment. The Irish Side of the Moon.
I still have a dream.
This is just a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love.
Freedom of information, personal empowerment. The Irish Side of the Moon.